Hello, I'm Jacob Hirshhorn, Deputy Director of the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. And it's my privilege to welcome you this evening, virtually, for tonight's discussion with artist Deborah Roberts and Senior Curator Evelyn Hankins. We're grateful to Deborah for joining us. I'm thrilled to share that the Hirshhorn Board of Trustees recently approved the acquisition of Deborah's work, Fighting All Ism. We look forward to welcoming this powerful work into our collection, and we will learn more about it and many others this evening. Please come back to join us next Wednesday, December 16th, for our last Talking to Our Time program of 2020, featuring artist Koda Zawa. 3 of Koda's works are currently in our online black box exhibition, In the Beginning, Media, Art, and History. And if you've not yet experienced this show, please log on to our website and see it before the exhibition closes at the end of this month. As we all attempt to navigate through this difficult second wave, I want to express my deep appreciation to all of my Hirshhorn colleagues who have been making extraordinary contributions since the start of this pandemic to keep our museum engaging, active, and really present, despite our closure, through programs like this one. And a special thanks to Amy Bauer, Kevin Hull, Rebecca Reagan, Kate Gibbs, and all of our curators who came together to create our Talking to Our Time artist program. But now let's turn to an artist who is exploring many of the most important issues and ideas of our time. Please enjoy tonight's discussion with Deborah Roberts and Evelyn Hankins. Take care and thank you.
We're just waiting for Deborah to come on.
I'm here.
Hi, there we go. Thank you. And let me just say thank you, Jay, for that introduction. And hi, Deborah. It's nice to see you. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Before we start our talk, I want to share just a little bit of background about you. You are a lifelong resident of Austin, Texas, and you received your MFA from Syracuse University. Deborah's art has been both exhibited and collected by museums and art institutions in both Europe and America, including the Whitney Museum of American Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Studio Museum in Harlem, among many, many others. And she has a major monographic survey opening next month at the Contemporary in Austin shortly. Deborah has recently been recognized with a number of awards, including the Pollock Krasner Foundation grant and Anonymous Was a Woman. And last year, she was a finalist for the Smithsonian's own National Portrait Gallery's Outwin Buchiever Portrait Competition. So welcome, Deborah. Let's jump in and do this.
Okay, I'm ready.
I know, this is gonna be fun. You've had an active art practice for decades now, but decades. But it's only been in the last few years that you've received this tremendous amount of attention and well-deserved acclaim. I told you this a couple of weeks ago when we chatted, and I first saw your work at a show called Fictions, which was in 2017 at the Studio Museum in Harlem, which I think was a little bit of a breakout show for you. And it literally stopped me in my tracks. There was this wall with 3 of your collages on them, including, if we could bring up the first slide, please, The Bearer, which is coming up now. Before we talk about works such as this one, which are your mixed media works, which I think most of us know you by, could you talk a little bit about the work that you made before these collages? And was collage something that was always something that you were interested in, or is it something that you started with these works?
Well, it started actually when I went to graduate school, but you know, I used to draw in the term of the Black romantic, where I would do a lot of church scenes. I would do a lot of family, little kids, you know, riding bikes have fallen off, you know, things like that pulled at the heartstrings. So and probably my whole life I was doing that work until one summer I knew the work was starting to change for some reason, and I decided to go with it. And then these collages came out after that. You know, it was a better way for me to talk about some of the issues that were foremost in my brain and that I wanted to get out. You know.
And have you always worked figuratively, or did you ever work in an abstract mode?
I've always been a figurative artist. I'm hoping, I think that the abstract stuff is coming a little bit more, and we'll see that in some of the slides coming. But I would say that I'm a figurative artist. I love the idea of abstract. I don't know if I know all the things that's required to do it properly, but
it seems like you've been playing with it in a lot of the patterns and the clothing of the work. So it seems like it's going to break free.
It's going to come. It may need a little bit more scholarship, but I'm going to work on it, you know.
All right.
To get it right. Well,
I want to see those works. Let's talk about this work specifically called The Bear. Like almost all of your works that I know, it looks specifically at children, mostly girls, but also boys sometimes. And it has some of the key elements of your work that I think of when I think about it. It has an array of sources from both historical and pop culture materials, and it basically brings them all together to look pretty frankly at our current moment. And I think specifically here, this points to the cultural constructs of beauty and femininity and the way that they offer incredibly narrow and exclusionary ideals defined by the white gaze. What I love is the mask. I mean, the thing that I find so compelling about it is the mask on the girl, and then you have this white face that kind of represents all of the ideals of high glamour. Can you talk about the decision to work with children or to depict children? And then talk a bit about the hands and the feet, which always play a really prominent role in your work.
Right. Like when I first started doing this work, and these were from some of my earlier works, and, you know, you can still see my hand, and I was very much still painterly and really pushing the boundaries, adding collage and mixed media on the work. But I always have this idea. I had this Life magazine cover that showed the riots in 1967. And it was just the whole city in Los Angeles was burning up. And then you would turn the page and it was this glamour ad. Can't your life be great? You know, and it had this lady, she was being tossed up in the air and she had a glass of champagne. And on the other side, the whole city was burning up, you know, pretty much. And I just thought in 1967, this is how they placed the ads. And so in this work, this is one of the pictures from the magazine, in which the lady, I said, I always call this person Beauty. And she's whispering to her and said, you're not adequate enough. You need to do this, you need to do that. And this idea of ideal beauty, whispering to Black women and Black girls, telling them, your mouth, your lips are too thick. I mean, your skin is too dark. You know, what's wrong with your hair? So this whole idea of Madison Avenue talking and speaking to women of color and the things that they tell us. And so I really wanted to, do this in this work and how early it starts. I mean, this is 8-year-old little girl, and she's already having people pull at her, So.
And on the hands here, I mean, one of them, it looks like a boxing glove, and the images look like a crowd of people. I think they're young men or boys.
Yeah, they're young men.
And what is she holding in her other hand? I couldn't tell. It looked like a sculpture or something, but.
No, and this hand is Martin Scorsese. That's his hand.
That's his hand, okay.
Yeah, and it's this idea of, cinema and way images are projected out into the world. And when I saw these hands, I really loved them. They were really big, and I thought they worked with this little girl's body. And so I added it to it. And then I put a sleeve that this is corporate America. This is telling us about our beauty and what is good and what is bad. So those little tropes and stereotypes I put into work. And then this idea of dark skin, light skin, that you have to be fair skin to get ahead, and then all dark girls sit back. And so this whole idea of these two things working at the same time, they're pulling at her, dark skin, light skin. Then you have the woman whispering in her ear, and then you have, society pulling at you. And then you have these beautiful little red tennis shoes, because I'm only a little kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the little punctum on the whole work, actually. If we could look at the next slide, please. This also is an example of how the hands, take on such a prominent role. And this work, when I look at it, every time I look at it, it really reminds me of like high modernist collage. It's like John Hartfeld, Hannah Hogue, or even Romero, but mostly the others. And I think it's because there's a preponderance of the collage elements compared to the patterns or the hand painted and hand drawn elements. But it's also because it's exploding off of the frame. This idea that like it's so powerful, its visual power is so much that the frame can't contain it. Right. So, Can you talk about how you find the balance between drawing and collage and how that plays out? And then also, again, what these collage elements do that drawing can't do for you?
Okay, I'll start with the collage elements. One of the things that I really, really love about collage is because I always, keep, championing this notion that we're not just monolithic people, we're various people with different ideas and different ways, that Blackness isn't just this one thing, it's a multitude of things. And so collage helps me break down that language and be able to add it to my work, which is very important. And so I love the idea that collage can be in different colors, it can be different textures. And this piece in particular, this is when I tell you, when you talked about reverberating, is that how the work is kind of fracturing. So this is in 2019, I saw that the work was starting to fracture a little bit, but I've kind of, pushed it down a little. Head nods and handshakes was this idea of, when Black people see each other, we may not know each other, but we can do this. And we know exactly what that means. We don't have to give a handshake. We're like, how you doing? And so this idea of just this unique tribalism when it comes to this idea of Blackness that I really liked. And I can't think of the second part of the question, how collage really—
What does collage do that drawing doesn't?
Well, it's just, I love drawing. I can be seduced by this whole idea of painting and drawing. And collage just helps, keep me focused. Sometimes I could just concentrate. Like if I had to draw those hands, and I've drawn those hands before, I spent days and weeks doing it. I mean, it was just, they never will be perfect. But the idea of collage is saying it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be something. And it has to be human, and you have to be able to recognize that thing. And so I love collage. It just opens up so many more, ways of talking about anything, whether it's beauty, race, gender, just a multitude of things.
So thinking about collage, and I know you started working with little girls, and then, I was reading somewhere that you got people ask, like, when are you going to work with boys, and when are you going to start working with boys? And so can you talk a little bit about maybe your reticence, if you could call it that, to work with boys? And then they face very different challenges, and
they do.
Both personally and culturally, and how you try to work that through in your work. Can you speak to that a bit? Right.
The first groups of boys I did, they looked very young. They looked younger than what even I wanted them to look, because I wanted them to look innocent. Mm-hmm. I noticed that with the boys, I could not put big gloves on them, because then they would become angry and, even though they weren't angry, but they would be seen as being angry or very aggressive, criminal. I noticed that if I put stripes on them, I also got that criminalization thing. I'm working against that. We can talk about that when we show some other works, but there were certain things I couldn't do with boys. I wanted to talk about toxic masculinity. I wanted the idea of allowing boys to be able to cry without anyone, saying that they were different. I started using pink on clothing with boys. I wanted them to be, not everybody can be this manly person. Some people are a little bit softer, and that doesn't mean anything, but they're just gentle people. So not being a guy. So I know that Black men face more, not a little bit more, just a little bit cooler, a little bit hotter things than Black women face, but trying to address those in my collages, having not deal with some of those issues were a little bit harder. But as the work grew, as I got more comments about the work, what I needed to work on, just thinking about it and reading more, the boys start to now mature. I mean, this was very early work. This is even an early work. And, with anything like that, it takes time. It's a little bit failures. You're going to have some that not quite hit the mark, and you learn from those. And now the work is really pushing those boundaries in ways that I'm very, very happy with.
That's great. If we could see the next slide, please. So this was the work that was featured at the National Portrait Gallery, the Smithsonian's Portrait Gallery, I should say. And it interests me because there's this back and forth, again, kind of a reticence between working with or identifying specific historical figures and, more anonymous people that we can throw our own projections onto. This is draws on photographs and I think mugshots, I'm not sure, of George Stinney Jr. He was as I understand it, a 14-year-old from South Carolina who in 1944 was executed by electric chair for a crime that he did not commit. And it was only a few years ago, I think 2013, 14, that he was finally exonerated. His family finally got that, that little justice. But he's the youngest person to have ever been executed in the United States. And he stands as an example of the racial injustices that we face historically and at this moment. So when I look at this work, I am so struck by the way the clothing seems so oversized, and it just emphasizes his youth and vulnerability. And this was a part of a series of portraits. Could you speak to them about and speak to that series and how it's different to work with a historical figure rather than, again, that anonymous figure that I feel like we can all, it opens up more projections.
Right. And this is the only one that I know we're not supposed to ever say never, but I don't plan on doing any other faces other than George Stinney, like this is his real face and not, obscuring it or making it different. He was so important because he was a little kid who wanted to be an artist, who had all sorts of hopes and dreams. And simply because he saw those girls and spoke up, he was accused of killing them. And in this work, you're right, I wanted to show that, we don't times lift young Black boys up. I wanted him to float in the air. It was 80 days from the time of arrest and death. I wanted to show the string, on his shoe. These boots, he didn't have shoes on at that time. He couldn't have done that. And then I wanted also to show the flatness of his shirt, that he was just there. I mean, they're almost like prison cells within his shirt. Right. And in his face, his face is just heartbreaking. He looks like he doesn't know what has happened to his world. And it's just, even to now, just thinking about it, I think this is the most important work that I would ever do. I think I've done 8 of these works, and I hope not to do, I thought maybe doing 2 more, just to finish out everything I wanted to say. And I don't know if I'll do those 2, but I will say this is one of my best ones. I really love this work. But I wanted more people to know about George and know about his story. And now he's in several big collections and people will be able to see his work. See him and read about him who didn't know about him.
Right. Myself included, I'll confess. Right.
And now we know, like I said, there are multitudes of George Stinneys out there. George Floyd, there's just a multitude of Black men and children and Black women who have been accused and killed for simply just living, and this work, I love it. I love the boots. I love everything. This is where I can tell you where I can get seduced in the painting. And,
really?
And just, I spent a lot of time, on the hand. I was painting the hand, and I was realizing when I did this on canvas, I don't paint these. And one of the arms, the left arm is really painted. And the other one is the pastels, because I was like, wait a minute, stop. You're not painting, stop painting. I always tell people I have rules about my work, and maybe I shouldn't, but I do. And my collages have to at least be 65% collage and the rest painting, drawing, and all that. But mostly
not 60, collage. Not 70, 65.
No, 65%. And please don't ask me how I know.
I'm not going to ask. I just love the number.
I know. I'm crazy. It's just, I know when I paint it too much, and I was like, you need to round that off. You need to put more shading. You need to do more line. I know how to do that. And it's just not what I need for this work right now. Right. And so I love it anyway.
Well, I mean, I think this work also reflects an important shift in your practice, where the scale got much larger. This is roughly 6 by 4 feet. And you began to use gessoed canvas and board as your support rather than paper. And it's funny because I think of small scale and paper to be the kind of the markers of classic modernist collage, you know, again, back to Hartfield and Hoke and Beard, and they're small and they're on paper. They're not small, but they are compared to a lot of work these days. And what I think, at least when I've seen these works in person, these shifts really amplify that focus on the on the subject, which you talk about as being demanded by that white background. So is that what kind of drove your decision to go larger and on a stiffer, harder surface? Or can you talk about that shift?
But you know what? It's so weird. I tell people all the time, I let the work dictate what happens. And I noticed after the barrier, they started pushing off the page. And I was like, what happened? They were literally getting bigger in 2018. And I just allowed it. I needed more paper. I started getting bigger paper. And then when I moved into my studio, I decided I'm going to put these on canvas. And because, and I had a discussion with my gallery in London, is that the paper, you're gluing paper with paper and it shifts and it moves because paper is alive. And I've always wanted to get a flat surface, and because I really wanted these to be flat, but paper moves either because it's too warm, it's humid, whatever, and it would ripple, And I would say, what's happening? And I talked to a conservator and they said, paper moves, it's alive. People need to get over it. They don't understand it. They need to get over it. That's what happens when you put paper against paper and water. And I love that because I could easily tell my gallery that, and it was great.
Museums also complain a lot.
But it's it could be flat in my studio and it could go to the framer. That's a different temperature. It moves. I'm not going to talk about paper, but what drove me to the canvas is that I noticed that a lot of collage artists wasn't doing canvas. No one was. And I also tell my galleries, these are huge. Collages are not supposed to be this big. And I tell them all the time, but the work is requiring the size shift. And I just allow it to do that. I mean, I could do little small, 8 by 10s or 11 by 12, 10 by 12s or whatever, but the work is demanding its space in the world. And I have to let that happen. It's being earnest with the work and allowing the work to move me and not me the work.
And is the gesso just to keep the canvas stiff then? Does it is it a texture thing or is it just a function to keep the canvas, to give you a different kind of primed canvas? But gesso is a thick primer.
I know. And I like the gesso on it because, we do 7 to 10 layers of gesso. I want a white surface. I don't want a cream surface. I want a white, smooth surface. So we do layering and sanding in between gesso. And it almost gives you a paper quality, but
it doesn't move.
It's smooth. And I really like that. And it works well with my work. I can tell you I did some pieces in linen and it didn't work well. I mean, the linen didn't work, but the canvas works. So
that makes sense. If we could look at the next slide, please. So this is Fighting All Ism. And as Jay mentioned, our board of trustees approved the acquisition of this work at our November board meeting. It's an amazing work, and we are thrilled to have it in our collection. And I want to say that I think it will resonate especially well with the Hirshhorn's unique location on the National Mall and the kind of broad international audiences that we have. I mean, I think we're all looking forward to opening the museum and putting this on view. I found it really compelling for a variety of reasons. The kind of juxtaposition of a vulnerability and defiance, those outstretched hands, even as she's seated. But I also, the more I looked at it, I thought about the androgyny of it. The clothes don't read male or female. And that fragmented face, the more I looked at it, the more I was like, I can't tell if it's a boy or a girl. And it seemed to point to the way that gender difference isn't really visible until kids go through adolescence. And it seemed to me that only the hair was the only real signifier of femininity, at least it's my reading. But I loved is though you kind of in constructing the subject in that way, you empowered it to very much resist all those categories and subjectivities, you know, that you're talking about in the title, all of those isms.
Right.
This to me really exemplifies that idea of fighting that monolithic blackness that you talk about. And so could you talk a bit more about how that underpins your practice?
Right. Well, let me just talk a little bit. And this definitely is a girl. And this is one of those times when I really worked on, you know, making the pants, not really painting the pants, doing a drawing on top of the pants, doing a different type of treatment to the hands to make them just, you know, push outward. This is the first work that, again, she's floating, but this is the first work I've played with perspective, you know, that was very important. To start moving, and you'll see that too in the other works, is just trying to move the way people think about my work. Some of the, and fighting all the isms is saying that so many times at such an early age, we had to fight sexism, racism, I mean, homophobism, I mean, so much stuff. And when will it be enough, you know? And this idea of, will it be enough in this kid's than her generation? And I think not, but we always have hope that it will be. I don't know. I mean, I can't really, you know, this is when I told you I was playing with color and stripes and things like that. Abstract was coming out, and a lot of things are at play here. I don't want people to focus, but her feet are really big, you know, they, but I don't want anybody to go to the Hirshhorn and say, damn, some damn big feet, you know, but the idea of her pushing forward and almost to the point where she almost has to stand up. So it's this idea of like stopping and pushing upward and then being allowed that there's nothing holding her, you know, nothing structurally holding her there. It's only this white space and she's floating. Right. And I talk about the idea of the white space when I talk about racism and how we are seeing through this lens of whiteness, and it's all around her. And she's finally, you know, and as we see the more work, she's going to start taking up space in that. She's gaining her own steam, her own identity of who she is. Right. And God, it's like, I think the white space sometimes in the work, it especially in these works, it has too much importance almost. And I'm moving away from that. I'm saying that, you know, we have to take up that space. You know, the images, we have to be our own heroes, our own space, and demand that people see us as human. And sometimes now that space is not so important anymore. We don't need that. I mean, people don't need that type of approval or people to understand. Just know that I am human, I hurt, I bleed, I die, you know.
Right. And I think the next slide is similar. It's from that. It's not, I wouldn't call it a series because I don't think you work from a series, but it's that arm stretched out. I think of that painting. I think it's Mantegna, The Lamentation of Christ in Milan. You know, that painting that we all learned in art history. It's like the example of foreshortening. And when I look at this painting, that's all I think about. What I love about that, kind of thinking back to that, you were talking about abstraction and the patterning coming back. These color choices that she's wearing, it's on one hand, it's like, I'm like, is she so young she doesn't know? Or is she so brave and bold that she doesn't care? You know?
And it's both. It's both of those things. It's like when you're 8, 7, 8, even 9, that's when you start making the first choices about your hair, your clothes, everything. And it doesn't match, but it looks good to you. Right. And this is one of those works I told my sisters, I said, this was too much. This is too many patterns, you know, but I like it. And so you can see from fighting the isms and it was only a year apart. When you look at the hand and how, like I said, I can be seduced by drawing and painting. The hands are totally different. I used a different type of craft paper on that, glued it on, and then drew the hand on top of that. So this idea of still asking, receiving, and still asking to be recognized for being a human in a different type of way. You know, the first hands were out. This one is now, you know, more pushing toward the audience, asking them to join her in this space.
Right, it's more open.
Yeah, and it's still moved to the side. So if you look at some of my other works, the kids always move to the white space. They're rarely, even though fighting the ism is center, they always move around the work,
Right. There's the dynamism. It's that movement that's part of their power, I think.
Right, exactly. And I found something in this work that this is all new work, by the way. I normally would have put a fist right at her hip, another hand. And I decided that in this time that we're in right now, that this open hand was more important than the idea of I'm asking you for something, and if you don't give it to me, I'm going to take it because it's mine too. And I thought that this was very important in this piece for people to see that maybe it's time for us to hold out an open hand. And so, and that kind of sounds Pollyanna now that I'm thinking about it, but it was, it was what I was doing.
It's what you're thinking. I mean, that's a conscious choice. If we could look at the next slide. So this is going back a couple of years, but it's a complex work with lots of different children. And I love how, again, like you were talking about that shift to the side, but also some of them are more playful and others are definitely more wary. But I thought this was a great one to talk about process a little bit.
Right. I
am a process nerd. I want to know, where do you cull your source materials from? What does that process look like? How do you keep track of them? And I, as a certain kind of Luddite, really think of I imagine these huge flat files that I don't think anybody has anymore. They're probably all digital, but can you talk about where you find all these materials and how you bring them all together?
Well, I do a lot of research and unfortunately, I have to stop telling people where I get my sources from because I'm getting a lot of copycats. But that's unfortunate. But I do a lot of research and looking for kids. I look for kids that are from different countries that have a little bit more innocence, but have been through a lot. But that innocence, that joy, that love is not gone. And that's very important in my practice. And that's what I try to do. And it's not like, American kids have been touched a lot by pop culture. So their ideas of things may be different and they grow up a little faster. These kids, they haven't, although they dealt with a lot of tragedy, probably, they still have that sweet joy that I'm looking for in the work. And so I look for those type of faces and I apply them to this one. For my patterns, I just put in stripes or textures or flowers or whatever, and I get different types of things. And then I said, you know what? If I was 8, I would probably wear this. And so I'll put it all together. I have like the little girl with her hands on the hips, that pattern plays with your eyes. And that's why I always talk about how little Black girls are seen less seem less innocent than other kids. They're just their peers, but they're not. And so this idea of this thing playing with your eyes and telling you things that are not true, that is she's right out front and present. So when you go up to this work, it'll hurt your eyes to stare at it, which is something that I like in the work. You can also see in this work how fracturing, I tried to fracture the work a little bit more. Right. The little girl behind the boy who's could catch him if he falls, right. That arm is fractured somewhat. And of course there's celebrities in here. I'm not going to say because I am getting away from that because I had so many people saying, is that Jay-Z? Is that?
Yeah, well, it becomes like a puzzle. Like you look for the person instead of looking at the work.
Right.
So I my sense is, and I think I understand that you don't make sketches, but what's the first move when you're standing in front of that gesso sanded work canvas ready to go? Is it a pattern first, or is it the collage?
The face. I always start with the face. In fact, but that has changed though. I mean, I say always. But let me say, in this work, I get all the faces down. I kind of know. I don't. This is a really linear piece, and so I got all the faces down. The first 3 group of girls with the stripes and the plaits, I got all that down, and I could have left it there. And then I said, no, I want to stretch it out a little more. And I started thinking about the faces in the back, because then you can tell from 2018, I was trying to play with push and pull, the little figure in the back, but not quite right yet. But, you know, and some other works, you're going to see that got better. Thank God. and so I really, you know, this idea of getting them down, almost like James Baldwin's hands are in here. You know, I almost didn't put the last girl in, but I felt it was too much space in between the last figures. And so I put a really big hand, and then I had that hand shooting across to,
I love that.
Which is Paul Pierce's hand, which is a basketball player, if you didn't know, from Baltimore.
By telling us all this, we're all going to start this process.
I know, but this is 2018, and this is at the Virginia Museum of Art. So this is
Richmond.
You have to go, you have to go and see it.
Right. All right. If we could see the next slide. Let's talk about titles. This work and the next are titled with names. They're relatively recent, and at least from what I've seen, and I haven't seen it all, this is new, because I think when I think of your titles, what I love is they're like really direct, but then they're also really elusive. So they open up a lot of possibilities, even as they kind of often slap you in the face. But and I think it reflects your interest in text. But could you talk about how your interest in titles, and then what it means when you start using names instead of titles?
Well, after I finished all the work for the contemporary show, just like every artist do, works kept coming out. Sonika and Grace was one of those works. And I just saw that, you know, I would just, you know, put the collages on the face, just the face, no bodies. Came in one Saturday and I looked at the face. They were just taped with blue tape. And I said, I know what I want to do here. And I just did it. And I was supposed to be done. And all of this came out. And this is, like I said, this is a 70 square piece. It's huge. Right. And you can't tell if these girls take up all the canvas. Right. There is less white space. They are demanding attention in the most innocent way. They're standing there and they're staring you right in the face and see me. And you see less white space around them. Their hair is really big. It's very textured. Their skin is really luminous. It's multicolored, like the sun is on them. I love this work. This is, I love it. My galleries, they can't get it yet. I love it. It's I can't tell you, this dark skinned, beautiful little girls who are innocent, just like any other people. And I just did a series of works where I talked about the 400 girls that have gone missing, girls and women, Black women, of the last 5 years, and no one's cared or said anything. And no one knows what's happened. Some of them have been found, but we don't know because we never hear what was the outcome. And I just thought about these girls and how no one is looking for them. And they could be anyone's child. And so this piece was just so important. And I thought about grace, having grace and beauty. And then I wanted to get a name, Sonika, and I may not be pronouncing it right, so please don't write me. This idea, if your name is Shamika or Tamika or Sharonda, you don't get the attention of if someone's name is, Pear or Apple or, Blair. If Blair goes missing, we're going to find Blair, but if Sonika goes missing, she's run away. So things like that I wanted to portray in this work, and this subtlety, how dark-skinned people have kind of in ways been overlooked and not seen. So they are both present and absent at the same time. And the space. Yeah. Go ahead. No, I'm done. I could talk all day. Don't get me.
I was thinking, I just wanted to get to the next work because I think Delilah is also from the same series. So having you speak that way.
This is another piece. This I found out from my mom that my great grandma, who was born into slavery, was named Delilah. Oh. And I thought that I would name this piece that because there is a certain type of comfort and quietness in this work that I normally don't have in my pieces. That I don't know. I don't know if it's because we've been, locked up for COVID, that there's some quietness that I notice is coming in the work. And again, I chose a darker skinned person. And, with the colors are all over.
Right. And again, taking up the space on the canvas.
Yeah, she takes up the space, even though she's like halfway in the middle. She's right in the middle, but she's not in the middle. She's, there's still space around her.
But again, it's like unable to be captured by the canvas. She can't be restrained. It's like the collage we looked at the beginning. If we could look at the next slide, please. So this is a hot item because you were telling me earlier that it was hard to find because it took a while to get here and it's all sold out. This is the October issue of Harper's Bazaar. And given your interest in beauty, it seemed like, and standards of beauty, I found it fascinating that this is where your work ended up. I applaud them for their decision.
Right. Thank you.
I hope that it brought your work to a broader audience and made them think about the questions that you're asking. But I'd love to know about how this came about. Was it a commission that you created this work specifically for the cover? And if so, did your approach change? Because there's there's a presenceness to the gesso and the materiality of your work when you see it in person, or even when you see it in reproduction, but than it is when you're making something knowing it's going to specifically be for mass reproduction. Could you talk about that?
No, in fact, here's a little backstory. Your piece and this piece was given both to Harper's Bazaar. And they chose this one for the cover. We gave them, they said, they didn't want to commission me to do any work because I'm very expensive. And so they said, do you have any works that you think will work? And I said, I have 2 works that I know. I knew, unfortunately, they were going to pick this work because it's everything. The colors of the fuchsia pink, the little girls, this idea of these 2 little faces looking directly at you, the flowers, the colors, the movement of one shirt and the flatness of another. And I just knew they were going to, and the idea of the lollipop, the pop. And this work is actually called Unseen. And so I have this big hand, and this came along with the work that we saw in the contemporary show in Austin. It was all in line with that work. And the lollipop, the idea of the Tootsie Roll, the pop, the violence against Black bodies. And so I kind of have them crunch as if they heard a pop. And then there's some big hand coming in and giving them something very innocent and yummy. Is this little Tootsie Roll. But it could be a loud noise. Like I did a series of work called Who Heard the Thunder? We Heard the Thunder. And normally when you hear thunder, it's a gunshot. And so this, it's just how the work is unfolding. And you're right, there's so many little tropes and little things that are hidden in here that I hope that people really, do a deep dive and wonder why these things are in the work,
And why it's on the cover.
Yeah.
I mean, and
right.
Ask that question. So we've talked a bit about your show at the Contemporary, and I just wanted, before we open it up to questions, I would say to anyone who's watching, you can put questions in the Q&A and I'll take a look at them and we'll ask Deborah some of them. But can you talk about what's going on with your work and in your studio right now? You've talked about it a little bit, but I love you speak really eloquently about how you follow the lead of your work. And so I'm going to ask, where is it leading you? Aside from the abstraction, where else is it leading you?
It's leading me. I told someone, I guess it was you maybe, I was talking about that because I'm doing a little building in the back of my house, it's a lot of materials back there. And I'm finding that these materials, the structure is finding its way in my work. And so I'm back there like a little mouse and I'm just taking things and I'm putting them on my patio. So when I get into my new studio and back, I can really, really just put it all out there and see what happens. That's what I'm gonna do in the summer. I always just put it out and see what happens. And in my kind of public studio, I'm just going to be working all on canvas works, trying to push the envelope on those, a little bit more abstraction, hopefully, as both my galleries shiver. But
maybe they're not watching.
Right. And I always say that each artist is different. Everybody's track is different. My work I've always believed in it, and it brought me this far. I'm going to keep allowing it. It has something to say. And maybe it's life, maybe it's age, I don't know, but I'm letting it have its space. And like I said, now the images are absorbing the space of the canvas. Right. And they do not need to be, and that's one thing I will tell them, they do not need to be any larger. So stop getting larger. But I do like the idea that the whiteness is getting smaller, that more of them is now taking up that space. Right. And I think that had to do with COVID and being in my studio, listening to different types of podcasts, different way people were feeling and expressing that type of love for one another. And it just, the idea of being human and that we're all human, we all in this storm together. We're in different ways, but we're all here together. Some people on yachts in this storm and some people on little dinghies, but we're all in this storm together. So I think that's what I'm trying to say about the humanity and the work, is that we're all human.
Right. And that shared humanity that I think you've spoken of. I'd like to look at a couple questions in the Q&A. This is from Lisa Murphy. She said, I so appreciate your collage work, full of powerful narratives and movement that demand our full attention and respect. Can you speak a little bit about your sculpture and text-based work? And this points to me that maybe I should have put some images of those in, but.
Right. Well, I do have a sculpture, one of my sculptures in my house, but I'm not going to move the camera. But as you see, I'm not a really good housekeeper. But one of the things my text-based work is my heart. I tell people that all the time. That work is called Sovereignty. Is of Black sounding names who have been historically put in this idea of being low class, but these are proud American names driven out of Black culture and should be honored just like any other names. One of the first rights of free slaves and free people was to name their children. And so my text-based work really harkens in on that idea of naming and being uniquely different and the individuality of those names. I mean, there's 1 million of Deborahs out there, and there's probably 100,000 Deborah Roberts out there, but there's probably one person named Tawana Kalala, whatever name, right. And which is great. I mean, if it could be two names put together. So that's really important work for me. And the sculpture piece, oh my God, I don't know who this is, but I'm learning to there's so many different ways and different languages to talk about Blackness. And I'm trying to explore that. I did a series of works for Velmitter called The Trumpet of Consciousness, where I talked about George Stinney in a different way, how books were put on the electric chair to lift him up so that they could put the hat on to murder him, and what that felt like, and the idea of him walking this little boy to the electric chair and that noise the chain would make. And so I did I called that noise a trumpet, and it's a trumpet of consciousness. We have to be conscious of these things. And then I put it on a pedestal. And so that was my first idea of sculpture. But I was walking to Rafka Bailey this morning. I have a long way to go, but I think Radcliffe, I love him. He would tell me I got a long way to go. But it's this idea, not everything's going to be perfect. And if you get into this business or getting into the art world thinking everything you're going to do is going to be just the greatest thing in the world, then you're in the wrong business, or you need medicine. I mean, because it is not. And if that's what you only think you want, you really need institutional medicine, So anyway.
A frankness about an artistic practice there.
Yeah.
So Shay Youngblood has asked, could you talk about the Cutie Pie series you exhibited at your show at the South Dallas Cultural Center and the piece in the Black Futures book? But we don't have images of them. Clearly, I'd love to hear you talk about these.
Well, she's talking about some of my graduate work at Syracuse. Cutie Pie was the first series of small collages. When I was trying to figure out, one of the things that I tell young artists that has been tremendous for me is that if you can't figure out something, go small. Don't until you get it, then you can start building it up and go large. When I was thinking about doing bodies to my collages, I didn't know what that was going to look like. So I got a series of maybe 5x8, or maybe a little bit smaller than that, maybe 4x5, little canvas, little panels. And I created these little works, and they were called cutie pies. And I did, I think I did 12 or 25. I do a lot of work. And because, I don't get it right away. It's like, I'm one of those people, it's not going to be perfect, but I'm damn going to try to make it perfect. So Cutie Pies was that. The work that she's talking about is in the Black Futures new book by Kimberly Drew. Okay. And Jenna, losing her last name, but they did the Black Futures book. And right. I put one of my text-based works in there, and with all the Black names, and with Word, when I typed them all into the laptop, and I looked up, and they all had red lines underneath it. And it was Word was telling us that these were all wrong, misspelled, try again. And I thought, when I saw that, I said, that's the work. That's the work right there. I knew it was the work. And so I just reproduced that. So that's the piece she's talking about.
Okay. And then Aaron McCluskey asks, and this is interesting, I love your work and how much you've elevated collage in the art world. And I'll admit, I love that too. It says, are there other collage artists that perhaps have been overlooked that we should be looking at and learning more about?
God, I don't know. Because all the works and the people that I looked at, I think people know about. That's how when I was, everybody know about Wengechi Mutu, Benny Andrews, who does he's deceased, but did amazing work. Everybody know about Ramir Bearden. Right. And then we know about Hannah Hulk, Kurt Schwitter. I love Kurt Schwitter. If you're looking at text and how text work, Kurt Schwitter, a lot of people don't know about his work. I did my whole thesis on him. That's part of my thesis. Can you imagine I did Kirk Schwitter and Beyonce in my thesis?
Yeah, I can actually now, having seen your work.
Yeah, and it was a great experiment. So I can't think of any one right now. I mean, if you want to know artists that are working in collage today, I can tell you some names like that.
Perfect, that'd be great.
Crystal Davis, David. Andrea Chang, Zoe Charlton.
Who's a DC artist?
Yeah, DC artist. If I don't
putting you on the spot here.
I know. I'm thinking, oh my God, if I don't get him, somebody's going to get me. And Genevieve Gagniard, she does amazing collage work. That's my girl. Oh God, there's so many people doing amazing work out there.
But those are good names for us to all hang on and go look at. Thank you. I think this is gonna be the last question because we're running out of time. Says, I know, it's easy. That was easy to fill an hour. She says, do you ask models to pose, which I don't think you do. This is from Leslie Shaw. Or is there a particular body stance you view in various media? How do you decide how the subject's body appears?
Well, I don't get models because I'm worried that I do a lot of little kids and little girls. I don't want to get models that way, but I have, like when I was in London, the work that I have with the little girl with her hands on her hips. I saw this little girl posing and the London Eye. I mean, all London was around and she was posing and I was like, okay, I got to take a picture of her posing. So that made it into my work. Sometimes I'm just out shopping. Well, not now, but when I'm out shopping, I see little kids, and that's how I get some of my clothing because you can't believe what these little girls be wearing. It's nothing like sexual. It's just crazy. Yeah. I mean, how do they think about putting these things together? And it's their individual expression of self. Yep. And it's so beautiful.
And they're fearless because they haven't been socialized to be fearful.
Exactly. And so I love doing that. And a lot of the stuff, I just really do a lot of research and find stances that I really like and that I think that will work and what I need to say with my work at the time. And so that's how I work,
Well, I want to thank you, Deborah. This has been such a pleasure. And I look forward to the day when I can visit Austin and do a studio visit in person.
I can't wait.
I'll see you soon. And thank you again. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one. Be safe.
Be safe.
Test negative, as they say.
Definitely.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Leave meeting.